Welcome to the Fulcrum Podcast, where we find the balance or fall off the seesaw trying. Today we have a listener favorite, Hasan Sharif. You might remember him from his fantastic interview earlier in the year. Absolutely knowledgeable character, reads all the books, develops all the people, and fantastic to have him on the podcast. Hasan, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be back. Thank you for having me back.
It's a pleasure, my friend. We wanted to talk about all the books that we've read during the year, right? And because of the way our conversations go, we talked about many other worthwhile things, but we didn't actually talk about fun books we've been reading during the year and stuff. But I guess before we actually get into the content of what we've read, I'd like to maybe pick your brain a little bit about different reading techniques and what perhaps people might get wrong about reading as an adult.
That's an interesting question. I guess
Yeah.
the first thing that comes to mind is the illusion that I've actually read something and gotten something out of it, right? One of the things that I tend to talk to people about is, well, if we're going to dedicate the time to consume anything, but mostly reading, then if you don't take at least one or two nuggets out and do something with it, then what's the point of having read it? Because you're probably not going to remember most of what you've read unless you've read it a few times. And if you've bothered to read it a few times, then you might as well. So I'd say that that's probably one of the biggest mistakes, is that we just read something just to tick off a box to say, I've read it, but never really intended to do anything with it.
Yes, that resonates with me so much because where to go with that? Like the first thing is, I think a lot of us carry this this high school mentality of I need to have read the book from cover to cover because there'll be a test on it. People kind of read as if they're going to be judged if they quit the book, right? So that's one thing.
Yeah.
The other thing is it's almost like a notch in your belt kind of thing, like basically saying, oh yeah, I read 12 books this year. And like you said, what did you take out of them? What do you think?
Well, I do think that people think that way because I know I used to think that way. I remember I used to commute via the train back in the States when I was living and working in New York. And I just decided I was going to try to make good use of that time. So I decided to just start books. And I remember by the end of the first year, I'd read something like 25 books. And one of those books was literally the Bible end to end. Now, good
Yeah.
news is that most of the books weren't that long because I wouldn't have made it through 25 of them. But I also learned a very important lesson just about the Bible. It's not meant to be read cover to cover. I found myself reading and flipping back and like that doesn't fit. That doesn't make sense. But the point was that by the end of the year, I found myself saying to people, this year I read 25 books. And it really wasn't about what did I learned. It was really about I read 25 books. And you know what? If you're at that stage in your maturity and growth where that in and of itself is the accomplishment, then cool. But don't let that just be the end of the story, right? Can you get to the stage where you're being maybe a little bit more intentional about what you're reading and why? And as I said before, what is it that you're doing about it or with it? And so now I actually do try to make sure that I pay attention to what I'm reading, what are maybe some of the central themes. And yeah, I do, to your point, try to remember who wrote the book because I usually might come to a point where I want to recommend that book to someone. And it's just cool to have a complete recommendation. Hey, you maybe want to take a look at XYZ book by this particular author because it has this central theme that maybe helps you with whatever. But you know what? There's going to be times where you just don't remember, right? There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of information out there. Sometimes I'll be like, you know what? You should just read this book. I can't remember the author, but if you search on it, the cover looks like this, whatever it is, right? Just so long as the information gets to the person.
Yeah. And so many times I know I've tried to recommend a book to someone and it's been like, oh, it's on the tip of my tongue. I'd love to know, Hasan. I'm guessing you're probably not as compulsive a note taker as me. When it comes to retaining what you read, what do you what are your go-to tactics for that?
So for a while, I was actually doing a lot of note taking. I had a habit of basically writing down any of the key points that I got from a book that I was reading, regardless of when I was reading it. And I found that the same thing was true, even if I happened to be reading a couple of books at once. You might be reading something that's more instructional, maybe something that's a little bit more, educational, or something that's maybe a bit more entertainment focused. The entertainment stuff doesn't usually yield as much in the way of, life nuggets, but, sometimes it's just fun or entertaining. So I'd find myself writing notes, and for a while, I'd actually produce these things called self-talk summaries. And so I was trying to combine a couple of things. One is, can we start getting better at the self-talk or affirmations that we use to help get better in certain things in life? but then also use that as a way to summarize books. So if I saw a nugget in a book, then I might frame that as a self-talk or affirmation statement, and then I have a list of them. And so I found myself doing this for a while, to the point where I had probably, maybe about 20 books worth of these things. So I just go back to my notes, take all of the self-talks, and I just put them on a page or two per book. And I just found myself with a whole directory of these things. So I don't do self-talk summaries quite so much anymore, but I'll still jot down a couple of notes here and there. Maybe it's a phrase to remember. Maybe it's something that I actually do want to remember specifically because I'm coming up on a period where it's going to be useful to have that information. So I might just write it on a sticky note, post it right here on my computer, so that when I'm in the midst of things, I see it and it reminds me. I'm a big believer that if you're going to make use of something, put it someplace where you're going to see it. Even if you don't think you're seeing it, your subconscious does. So
Yeah.
yeah. So I remember, just a throwback to you and I talking before about systems, right? It's just always figuring out new ways and otherwise innovative ways, maybe even things that you steal from other people. I steal liberally. If I find something that's working for somebody, I'm going to give it a shot and see if it works for me.
Right on. So speaking of stealing from other people, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the self-talk summaries. Not that you stole them, as in our audience can probably steal them from you. So
Sure.
is the idea behind it that you read the book and then you have this one-page summary of affirmations or mantras that you might take away from the book, and you might get into the habit of repeating them
Yeah. Oh,
to yourself?
absolutely. Absolutely. I remember I read a book, and this is going to be one of those examples, tip of tongue, tip of tongue.
Yeah.
Um, I know the name of the author was Rick Warren, and I think
Uh-huh.
it might have been something about the road less traveled or something like that. But
Uh-huh.
anyway, in the book, there was this concept of your best self and the questions that you ask that help you identify who it is that you want to be. And
Mm.
this suggestion probably appears in a number of books, so I can't say who originated it, but it's basically taking yourself through a mini exercise where you ask yourself a few questions that just help tease out the things that are important to you. Here's what I learned today. Here's what I'm grateful for. Here is something that I want to work on. Here is a person that has made me smile today, like whatever it is. And you could do it in two chunks. You can do it in the morning so that it's more of a guide to how you want to spend the rest of your day, but you can also do it as a checkpoint at the end of the day to say, how did the day go, and what am I going to focus on tomorrow? And so I just know that part of that was about identifying certain phrases or affirmations that I could say that would help me with any of those particular areas. And so being able to read a book and come across something that says, yeah, this fits within, let's say my daily gratitude, or this fits within the way that I think about going out and meeting people and adding value. So one of them for me is that, I connect authentically without attachment to outcome. Right? And so that just says, I'm actually looking at expanding my network, but not necessarily because I want to get something from anybody, but I want to add value. And I just know that in the back of my mind, if I do that enough, then the right things will happen. So yeah, it will come from anything that I read, or maybe even if I'm having a conversation, and I might get a quote of the day. Sometimes the quote of the days are just things that just make me laugh off my stool.
Yeah.
Sometimes, stuff that says, oh, this is an introspective one. I should think about this.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And I guess from the perspective of affirmations, I can't say I use them that much, but they seem to be powerful tools. And you seem to be someone that practices them quite a bit. What do you think it is? Um, I I guess part of my skepticism about them tends to be like, hey, like if it was as simple as just saying like, hey, I'm going to be comfortable in this interaction, and therefore, the switch is flipped, and I'm going to be comfortable now. Everyone would be doing it, right? So I'm guessing there's some nuances that people often miss when they're doing these affirmations. What have you learned when you've been practicing your affirmations? What nuances have you found that you've had to like tweak to have them work for you?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And first and foremost, I'll say I'm not an expert, and nor am I somebody who practices them every single day.
Uh-huh.
But therein lies an actual, I guess, tidbit, which is the more you do practice something, the more that it actually does begin to serve you. Now, I've done it enough where there's certain things that just are true for me now. And a couple of things that I would say are the following. One is it's helpful to actually frame the affirmation in the present tense. So I noticed
Mm.
that when you gave your example, you said something to the effect of I will be, right? So it's future
Uh,
tense. So you're already telling yourself that it's not true today. So
yeah,
how can you possibly actually embody that? But if you start telling yourself that I am this thing, and we're not talking about, sort of these drastic and woeful departures from reality, right? You don't say to yourself, I am 7 feet tall, I am the
yeah,
perfect body shape, whatever the case may be. But what you can say is, I'm kind, right? I'm focused on helping other people. You can say things that are aspirational, but not completely untrue. And maybe there's been a little bit of a blockage that you work through. But here's what I learned about this is that probably the thing that shapes us most is what our subconscious hears about us. And when we're
mm,
kids, that typically comes from those who are around us. So if your parents say to you, oh, you're just shy, then that's going to have an impact. Versus if your parents say to you, oh, you're just cautious, right? Describing the same behavior,
yeah.
but attributing, sort of different attributes to it will have you think a bit differently as you grow up and think about that. And so when you think about all of the things that influence us, it's what we hear, it's what we see, it's what we experience. And probably the thing that is most prevalent is what we tell ourselves. And I know that in the community that I'm part of, a number of entrepreneurs who are focused on teaching people how to actually become better leaders in their lives and give themselves options. One of the big things that we talk about is what do you say to yourself, particularly when you're frustrated, particularly when things are not necessarily going your way. And we get people to kind of do a little bit of a demonstration. Okay, here's a scenario. What would you normally say? Oh, you're so stupid. Or what's wrong with you? Are you such an idiot? And even more blasphemous things. And we
Hmm.
don't even think about it. We laugh it off. But our
Yes.
subconscious actually hears that stuff and it embodies. So if we can reprogram, then why would we choose not to? And probably one of the best books that I've read on this is What to Say When You Talk to Yourself by
Hmm.
Shad Helmstetter. So that one I always remember, both the title and the author. It's because it takes you through a number of, different ways of looking at it. And you're right, right? No thing works 100% of the time for 100% of people. But
Mm.
I suspect that if many people just sat down and wrote 2 or 3 things that were really important to them, and they put it on a card and they read it every day for, let's say, a month or two, there's something that will likely change inside of them. And it will probably start with just the simple belief that if I say this enough times, maybe it will have an impact on what I believe about myself or how I should behave. And that's what I find about these things. If you see them enough times, it actually at least has you acknowledge. And oftentimes it's about acknowledgement and awareness that then gives you the space to change your behavior.
I like that. I yeah, while I said that I wasn't necessarily a big proponent of affirmations, maybe I need to broaden the scope of what that is, because I know, for instance, I've got a reminder on my phone that goes off at 3 p.m. every day, that says like find gratitude, and this is so funny. I probably habituated to it now. The message is something
Yeah.
like, focus on what you have,
Yep.
gain what you lack, focus on what you lack, lose what you have. And so
Yep.
I'm seeing that every day at 3 p.m. And yeah, like it's one of those things where I might not necessarily be in a mirror repeating the affirmation to myself. It is, in a sense, something that I'm reminding myself of, and hopefully, even though the conscious mind doesn't necessarily recall it straight away, maybe it is getting ingrained into the subconscious. Do you have any
Oh,
thoughts on
yeah.
that?
I would say definitely, and you bring up a good point, which is possibly just either the image or the stereotype that goes with maybe something that someone describes. And you even just pointed it out, right? Like, am I standing in front of the mirror just saying this thing to myself over and over again? And certainly that's something that you could do, but it doesn't have to be that, right? It could be, as you point out, it's just an alarm that pops up and I see it. And I see
Yeah.
it consistently every day. Whatever it takes to actually put something in your field of vision, in your field of awareness that is designed to help you think or feel differently about yourself, you can call an affirmation. So it might just be a mantra that heard your parents say or somebody that you really admire. It could be a quote from a speech, whatever it is that you use through repetition to alter who you are or who you think you are, you can call that an affirmation. So that's just another one of the key things that I've learned is that, how we perceive things, how we reframe things in our lives can help us win if we're willing to just try something different. So if standing in front of the mirror, sort of talking to yourself for 5 minutes doesn't work for you, then do something else. It probably still fits within the same frame. Like I have a couple of folks who record themselves behind maybe some music that they enjoy.
Mm,
I know I did that when I first started. I recorded a few choice statements behind some jazz just because I like jazz, and I would play that every once in a while. But I've got cards, I've got some things that pop up on an alarm here and there. So I tried different things, but I can absolutely say for me, there's a few of those affirmations that I absolutely believe, and I didn't necessarily start off that way. So I just know that, with repetition, things can change.
I think so. I actually, you mentioned the people recording themselves to music. I did that probably like around it was around 2007, 2008 when I was trying to
Yeah.
improve my dating skills. And so like
Uh,
part of that is like listening to all these dating coaches and like reciting what like the insights I hear about them to like some like very energetic music. For me it was at the time it was like industrial metal. And so
okay.
just before I like walk into a social setting where I'd feel like a lot of anxiety, I'd play this 5 to 10 minute track, and the music would amp me up. The I guess the principles and the insights would remind me of the things that I wanted to try out, and
Yep.
yeah, it kind of made it into a game as well because
Oh yeah,
um
it
yeah
absolutely is. I
yeah
mean, this is basically all about state change and emotional management, right? I mean,
yeah
whether you talk about, let's say Tony Robbins, who made this really
mhm,
famous with linguistic programming, right? I get myself into a peak state before I have to go and do something. Or
yeah
you can talk about somebody in sports, right? In the US, you watch baseball players before they, get up to bat to swing, they go through this ritualistic
yes
thing where it gets them into a state, or somebody will just kind of, sit and they'll meditate intensely before they have to get up and perform something. Like all of these things are still related. It basically says, how can I get present and start to get myself into the state that's going to help me perform best in this next activity that I'm about to engage in? I mean, it's old as probably, as human history, but these are things that we systematically forget until someone comes along and reminds us. And it usually shows up in many different forms. And like I said, I don't really particularly care about the form. Whatever works for you, as long as you actually engage in the principle, however it makes sense, then you're probably going to see a better outcome.
I think that's a good way of looking at it. Yeah,
Yeah.
with the so we're talking about the was it self-talk summaries? Was that the
Yep.
technique used?
Self-talk summaries. Yeah.
And you mentioned that you weren't doing them anymore. Is like what? Tell me more about how your practice has evolved since then.
I think just the way that I spend my time has shifted. So I do a lot of coaching and mentoring, and the cohort of folks that I work with continues to grow. And so we're always looking for systems to help us become more efficient as well as effective. So my partner and I actually just did a talk over the weekend on systems that we've implemented in our lives. And so what I find is that periodically I'll have to take a look at the way that I spend my time and ask myself, where am I getting the biggest bang for my buck? And so at the moment, self-talk summaries isn't as high on the list as it used to be. And
Sure.
that's not to say that I'll never do them again, but what I'll likely do if I do go back is, maybe spend an hour during 1 month where things aren't going quite so busily. And I might just go and, compile a summary of the ones that I hadn't gotten to. And here's the thing, there's a place where they all get stored, they don't get destroyed.
Yeah.
And when I get to put some more up there, then I'll get to put some more up there. But I think for me, it's really about looking at, here's a slot of time or span of time where these things are going on in my life. And what's the priority? And this is something that we constantly ask ourselves. What's the priority now? What's required of me now? What is the focus and the objective that I'm after? Who is it that we're working most closely with? And how does that necessarily show up in the way that we use our systems? And much like yourself, who's always looking for a better and more efficient way to do something. And, let's make sure that people understand that you've also got, a system around just even making decisions, right?
Mm.
Plug your book.
Thank you.
Make sure that we're reevaluating how we're spending our time to maximum effect. And that doesn't mean that we have to optimize every second of every minute of every day. But gosh, if we can just do that every once in a while, we'll probably find that we get more productivity in our lives.
Yeah, so it was like an intentional decision to basically say like, okay, at one point I had the space to do these self-talk summaries, and at the
Yeah.
moment you're prioritizing the conversations and the facilitation of your of the cohorts, and so that has slipped down. It has slipped down your priorities at the moment. Now, when I talk to you about books and stuff like that, you seem like the kind of person that retains what they read.
Right? There's
Yeah.
some stuff that's just always top of mind because it's just something that I use all the time. So, for
Uh-huh.
instance, the What to Say When You Talk to Yourself by Shad Helmstetter, I
Yeah.
find that anytime that I'm having discussions with people, that book comes up. Another one that comes up for me is Essentialism by Greg McKeown.
Mm.
When I'm thinking about how I actually use my time to maximum effect, that book was the pinnacle for me for looking at what is typically required of you versus what you think is required of you just because it's familiar and routine. And I always tell people when I describe that book that I did an experiment where when I was actually working full time in consulting, I'm in meetings all the time. And after a while, I stopped interrogating the requirement of me to be in the meeting. It was just customary for me to accept invitations. And I said, I'm going to do an experiment for a week. I'm not going to go to any meetings that I don't think are important unless somebody calls me and tells me, hey, we missed you at this meeting, we need you at the next one.
Mm.
I got like 6 hours a week back in my life because I found myself just going to things because my name appeared on the invitation list. And then
Yeah.
when you stop to think about it, how much thought is going into who should attend meetings? Oftentimes people just use a scattershot approach and be like, this might be, minutely relevant to this particular person. Let me invite them. Now, if you're the kind of person that just accepts everything that everybody tells you that they want you to do, you will never have time to do anything that you
Uh-huh.
think you should do. And that's what that book is about, is figuring out what's most important and prioritizing those things almost to the exclusion of anything else. Doesn't mean that has to be the case all the time. You can change your priorities, but it is something that you should pay attention to.
As you were saying that, I was thinking about the stark contrast between, I think many people, when the new year rolls around, they say like, I'm going to just say yes to everything. I'm going to
Yeah.
embrace the new year.
Yeah. Like
I
many resolutions, that usually lasts for, a period,
three
right? For
months.
some people,
Yeah.
it's the whole year, but for many people, not so much.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, I think that that'll be a good place to talk about like how we plan our years and um yeah, like how we reflect on them as well, because it's probably a fairly timely subject. When this comes out, it'll probably be like around January, I think. Let's talk about New Year's resolutions. I haven't set New Year's resolutions for probably about 10 or 15 years, but I remember one of the things that I think one of the things that was I found challenging was that I just run out of steam about like 2 or 3 months into it. And I think often that was because my why wasn't strong enough. And it goes back to what we were talking about in your last interview about why power. And I think that was like
Yep.
such a great the way you described it as well was so good. And yeah, maybe you could just give us a quick recap about willpower versus why power. That'll be
Oh,
excellent.
yeah. So I think willpower is the traditional thing that people learn growing up, I guess, depending also on the generation that you're a part of. But if you decide something, you should just stick it out because you said you would. And that's noble, but it doesn't take into account that, this world is filled with so many different distractions. We only have so much energy. And exercising will does take energy. It takes psychological energy. So if you're tired, if you are stressed or frustrated, if you're under a lot of pressure, you will probably find that willpower escapes you even faster. Whereas why power comes from a different place. If there is something that is just so important to you that it has to get done, it is a must have, not a nice to have, then all of a sudden there are these extra reserves of energy that you will find that you maybe didn't think were there. I know that David Goggins in his books talks about this all the time, right? Can't Hurt Me or Never Finished, his two books, really good books, by the way, are all about reaching down and finding that reserve that you didn't know that you were capable of. And if you think about it, the body is just this awesome design, regardless of how you believe it came to be. There are these kind of caps, these governing systems that are there to keep us from hurting ourselves.
Mm.
But when necessary, we can go much farther than we think. And so I just find that why power is just another way of tapping into those reserves. When you hear about the urban myths of the mother who's able to summon the strength to lift a car that's fallen onto her baby, right? I don't know if that's ever really happened, but you can be sure that it's inspired by seeing some great feats of strength occur because, somebody that you love was in danger. One that I use for myself is there was a point at which my mom and I were living in conditions that just needed to be changed. And I had gone off to college. And when I came back, they really needed to be changed. And I
Mm.
decided we need to make sure that we get into another apartment, like ASA, GDMFP, right? You can look that up if you don't know what it means. And so, and so I went out on a mission and got us a new place within a day and had moved us into the new place within 3 days, inclusive
Wow.
of driving back to my college, getting everything down and driving back to the city. And I remember the owner of the building says, I have never seen anybody move that much that fast. And it
Hmm.
was just that it was a must have. It needed to happen. And whenever I go through these exercises where there's a recall a time in your life when you did X, Y, Z just because it was necessary, that's the first thing that always pops into my mind. So, when I talk to people about this, I'm like, you got to figure out what your why is. There
Yeah.
is nothing like a good why. And it could either be a really positive something that pulls you into the future, right? Or it could be the nightmare that you're running away from, like, never again will this happen. Either is fine. Both are good. But
Yeah.
find a why. It'll always trump will.
Yeah. I that's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing it. And yeah, a great go-to story of like tell me about a time when you did something, yeah, something really hard and tapped into your deeper purpose. I guess for people that don't have children, like myself, and that can't have a child pinned under a car so I can find, strength reserves that I never had, or
Yeah.
and not necessarily facing an immediate eviction, or sorry, it wasn't necessarily an eviction, but just like having to move where you live to find another safe place. What do you what would you recommend to people in this current world that we have at the moment, where we have technology companies that are like hijacking our amygdala to basically say like this is the most important thing at the moment. You should pay attention to this, pay attention to our ads and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What have been your go-to tactics for cutting through the noise and really finding what's important?
I think for me, it's about stepping back and taking a little bit of a longer term view. And like you, I don't have children any either. But what I find is useful is to figure out what are some things that kind of resonate with me. So you're right. If I'm just on my phone or on my machine, there's going to be that message. And we kind of get a little bit numb to it, but some people don't. Some people are very, I guess, susceptible to this constant bombardment of what they should be focused on. But I find that taking a step back, whether that's, meditating for me, if you're not into meditation, maybe it's just taking a walk, maybe it's just having a conversation with somebody you trust and love, and just talking about what is it that I ultimately want my life to be about. I think a lot of times, and you may have heard me say this before, when we're growing up, we're usually asked, what do you want to be? What do you want to do? And that's a very career focused way of looking at things. And it's not necessarily bad, but one question that we also like to ask in our community is, how do you want to live?
Yeah.
And that encompasses so much more than just the job that you have that's going to give you money to pay your bills. It's what is it that you actually want to create? Where do you want to contribute? Who would you like to become? What kind of legacy do you want to create if that's important to you? And that doesn't necessarily mean something that you pass down to your kids. It just means something that may outlast you. And so
Yeah.
when you start thinking on that level, it maybe gives you a different sense of time than the immediate right now. And if you can get that, you recognize that it usually will require something more than just the immediate effort. It might be something that is longer term. It might be something that you now need to shift your being around. Maybe it's a long-term physical or health goal that you've got, which means, all right, maybe I need to change my eating habits. Maybe I need to start exercising. Maybe I want a relationship in the future because I do want children and I'm so far away from that now. Maybe I just start with, okay, well, what kind of person do I think I might want to be in a relationship with? We've actually given that advice to some of the people that we work with. Develop a list of characteristics that you want so that you tell your brain that it's important. You turn that reticular activating system, it's called an RAS. It's the thing that you say, hey, this is important to me. So now your brain starts to scan and see those things around you because we are into pattern matching. But just on that list, it's not just about the list that you want in someone else. You should also create the other side of that list, which is what are the characteristics that that person, if they were to show up in your life, would want to see in you? And that will
Mhm.
give you a place to start go working. So now you've got all of this additional input around things that could potentially be important to you. And if you allow it to affect you emotionally, this will be how I'll feel once this is accomplished, or I get to this particular milestone, and I'm able to see this thing realized. Now, all of a sudden, you've got something to pull you into the future rather than just, hey, right now, you should buy this product because it's going to make you feel good. I often like to ask, well, if it did make you feel good in the minute, that's the first order consequence. What's the second or the third order consequence? How am I going to feel tomorrow morning? If I did this for 30 days straight, how would I feel next month or next quarter? Those are some of the bigger questions that we need to ask ourselves, and they usually center around moments outside of just right now.
Sure. So if I'm understanding you correctly, you can find purpose by thinking about the end and then working your way backwards from there and thinking about what is the kind of person that I need to be right now in order to get over there. Is that
Yeah,
the
that's
idea?
right. Or what is the kind of person that I need to be willing to change into? Because I
Mm,
often talk about, there's the point A, which is where we are now. And let's assume we did sit down and have that discussion with ourselves or somebody else who's a loved one, and we determine that there's a point B that we want to get to. Well, we can probably agree that the person I am today isn't yet capable of producing the outcome at point B. So there is the definition of my journey. How do I get from point A to point B? And most people think it's about do, then have, then be, but it really is about be, do, and then have. And so who
yes.
do I want to be? I need to recognize that first. And now what are some of the ways in which I can support being that person and realize I'm not going to get it right 100% of the time. And it's certainly not going to happen overnight. It's something that I have to have a bit of aggressive patience around. This is important to me, so I'm willing to take the steps forward. And I know that it's going to be not a linear sort of thing. It might be 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It might be a step sideways. It might be a couple of steps back. But if I don't give up, then I'll at least begin to see some of the progress. And even if I can't see it, if I'm in contact with other human beings, they'll let me know there's something different about you. There's my evidence. And once you have enough evidence, you can no longer lie to yourself and say, oh, this is impossible. I can't do it. Because that's what most people do. They say, oh, I can't do this thing because I've never done this thing. That's
Yes.
where if you just have small efforts that you take consistently, what you're doing is creating evidence so that when you look back, you can't lie to yourself, right? If you've been reading for a week when you've told yourself for years that I never read, if you just force yourself to do it, or if you make it a game, or if you have somebody to help keep you accountable, you've now read for that week. You can no longer say, oh, I never read. You just did. So if you've done it, you can do it.
Love it. And I think we found the title of our podcast, Aggressive Patience. I love it.
Yeah,
Um,
there you go.
I I think was it there's so many things. I'm just not sure where to start. But I think one of the things that I really appreciate about what you were talking about was that you mentioned both where do I want to go, and I can't remember the exact words you used, but it was basically like what price do I need to what is the cost of getting there kind of thing. What is the sacrifices that I need to make? And I
Yeah,
think
well, who do I need to become in order to
that's
get
it.
to that point or produce those outcomes? But you bring up a really good point, which is it usually will come at a price, right? We talk about this all the time. There's a goal and there's a price for reaching that goal. And if I'm not willing to pay the price, I'm probably not going to reach the goal. But go ahead.
Yeah, that's I think that's when it came to the news resolutions, I think often, and I think this is also the case when it comes to even setting, smart goals. One thing that doesn't get taken into account is like what sacrifices will I have to make to get there, right? So, like in smart, you've got smart, measurable, actionable, realistic, timely. I think it's been a while since.
Specific, measurable, achievable, relative, and time bound. So
Got
that's the
it.
SMART goals. And it's funny because I came across something by Keith Abraham, who's an author, who says that's good. SMART is good. Smarter is better. So he adds E and R to the end.
Okay.
The E is the emotional attachment to the goal because that's the thing that will
Uh-huh.
keep you going, even when things don't necessarily feel like they're gonna, sort of work out the way that you think they should. And then the R is a relevant vision or realization, right? So what would it actually look like?
Uh-huh.
What will it feel like when I get there? So yeah, all of those things are absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Yeah, but I feel like correct me if I'm wrong, none of the letters actually take into account the sacrifices necessarily that you'd have to make, right? Or do they tap into them indirectly, do you think?
I think indirectly they could. So if you think
Yeah.
about them, specific doesn't, measurable maybe, because if I actually am going to measure how it's going, then maybe I have to make time for it. Certainly achievable is one that could be said to talk a little bit about sacrifice, because in order to achieve something, I might necessarily have to, and this is where a good action plan kind of helps you. What do I need to start doing, stop doing, do more of, do less of? That's the area of achievable, right? And I
Yeah.
think if people start to think in those terms, then I think it becomes a little easier for them to imagine how this could happen. Because otherwise, if you just set the goal and maybe you go through just a very high level approximation, then somewhere in there, there's this notion of magic that needs to happen.
Yes.
And if you can't visualize that magic, then the excitement only stays there for the first few days, and then you don't get any results, and then okay, the goal just goes away. The other thing that I like to think about with goals is something that I learned from one of my mentors, which is, goals are not always there to be achieved, right? A goal often is the thing that basically just keeps you on track. I've got this goal. If I don't hit it, it doesn't mean that I'm a bad person or that I should stop trying anymore. But if I've got the goal in front of me, at least it reminds me that there is something that I'm working toward. So if I'm given the option of having a goal versus not having a goal, I would much rather have the goal independent of whether or not I'm ever going to hit it. Because at least it reminds me that there should be something that I'm doing on a consistent basis, whether it's every day or every week or every fortnight, whatever it is, so that I'm actually moving toward that goal. And if I don't hit it, here's another one that I love talking about. We read the Gap in the Gain by Dan Sullivan. And this talks about how most people will take where they are and they'll measure where they want to be, and then they'll lament over that gap. Versus what we should do is we take where we are, we measure where we started, and we celebrate how far we've come. So even if I miss the goal, I'm not going to talk about the gap in having missed it. I'm going to talk about how much farther have I come than if I never had the goal to begin with.
That's a really good explanation of like how to accurately frame the goals and the journey. I really like it.
Yeah.
So Hasan, if people want to connect with you or find out more about your work, where should they go?
You can go to my LinkedIn page. Pretty simple to find me, Hasan Sharif. I would say that if it's worth a conversation, what I typically do is I need to figure out where are people now and where do they want to be. I've got a consulting background, and so it's hard to not be a consultant. So I always say once a consultant, always a consultant. But what I realize is that I don't typically have enough of a relationship with someone when I first meet them to presume to give them any kind of advice. But what I can share with them is perspective based on what they tell me. So I'll typically have a few questions. Where are you now? Where would you like to get to? What are the obstacles that you think you might face? What have you done up till now to kind of get there? Why is it important that you get there? Is it a must have or is it a nice to have? It's a little bit of that consultative discussion first to just get a view of the landscape. And then maybe I'll start sharing some of the experiences that I've had or experiences of people that I'm connected to, because that's what I do now is I collect experiences and I connect people to communities that help them thrive. So I would say, that all happens in conversation. This is why you and I keep chatting, because I also learn a tremendous amount. And I tell people all the time about the stuff that I learn when I talk to folks. So you can be sure that I've referred people to, hey, Joey's got this decision making framework that you need to look at. Or, this whole notion around doing podcasts, because it's a great way to learn and to incorporate into your own sort of kit bag new things that you can use for yourself or other people. So that's typically what I'm up to.
Wonderful, Hasan. And if people want to actually join your cohort, join that community, would they do it through LinkedIn, or do you have a special opt-in page for that or anything?
Don't have an opt-in page, tend not to advertise. Really what people can do is kind of chat to me. The way that we sort of run our community is it's by referral. And so,
Got it.
it's not about advertising and trying to see how many people. It's really about having these personal connections and figuring out what does someone really want, and is what we're doing, is the way they're operating uniquely purposeful for that person? And if the answer is no, that's okay too. Because what I typically tell people is that if you talk to me, two things are going to happen. One, I'm definitely going to give you some of the nuggets that I've learned and that have helped me, and hopefully they can help you. Two, we're going to answer all the questions that you have about whether or not any of the things that I have in my network could be useful to you. And if so, then let's actually pursue our relationship on that basis.
Okay, sure thing. So even though it's based off referrals, the first step would be to just like DM
Just a
you on
conversation.
LinkedIn. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Wonderful, Hasan. Do you have any final words or asks for our audience before we wrap up today?
Well, now that you've mentioned it, it is the end of the year, and by the time this airs, it's probably the beginning of the year. What I would say is that, you know what, there's definitely a pressure around new year, new you, and that's okay, but don't fall into the trap of just expecting that that's going to be something that comes and goes. If you really are interested in making a lasting change in your life, sit down and maybe journal or record something, whatever the medium is that's going to work for you. But ask yourself, why is this change really important? Why is now a good time to make that change? And who can help me, who can help support me in having made that change? Because there's only so much that we're going to do ourselves. Oftentimes, the integrity that we have around the promises we make to other people is the thing that'll help get us over. So who can be an accountability partner? When you're feeling the pressure of work, or maybe the sluggishness of having been on the journey for a while and you just think, oh, let me just give this up, I'll try it again. Who's that friend that's going to call you and be like, hey, you said this was important. Is this still important? Let's get up and do it again then.
Wonderful. And we'll wrap the show with that.
All right. Perfect. Thanks for having me, Joey.